Hey everyone, welcome back to You Are What You Love. I'm your host, Marissa Tandon, and before we dive into today's episode, I did want to give you a brief content warning. Today's episode does feature a small conversation surrounding suicidal ideation and depression. While it's certainly not the whole episode, I did want to let you know that it comes up before you get started. With that, please enjoy my conversation with Meghan Fitzmartin. Hey everybody, welcome back to You Are What You Love. Today I have a very special guest with me that I am quite excited to have. Beyond her professional accolades, which I am going to run us through in a very professional manner, she's also one of the lovely women who I credit with getting me into the podcast game to begin with. So if it weren't for this lovely lady who is joining us today, there may not be this podcast, which would be a bummer. I'm going to put that out there. So Meghan Fitzmartin is an incredible writer, and you have probably seen her work before. Most recently, the last arc of Tim Drake Robin just started, and you can pick up issue 8 today, as well as a incredible Justice League movie that is coming out, which I cannot wait to see. It is out now, and you can pick it up on DVD or Blu-ray. It is called Justice League meets RWBY Superheroes and Huntsmen Part 1. So today, Meghan is coming on to hang out with me and talk about other things, but we are going to find out what she's up to and how she's feeling. So please welcome Meghan to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. Like I said, I credit that first little group of women that we hung out with at the Austin Film Festival that I still speak to today as
Such a fun time, such a good group.
Yeah. Such a fun little adventure. And
Yeah.
now, look at us now.
Look at us now. Killing it. Absolutely killing it.
Well, I am super excited to have you on. And also, I have really been enjoying the stuff you've been putting out personally. So it's always fun to get through, talk about the influences of someone who's also putting out really cool work now. It's always a fun full circle moment.
Thank you. It's fun to be able to put out stuff. I'll be honest. I love being able to create things, and it's really helpful, especially because I think, this awesome podcast and you talking exactly about the things that got people into it. I think this movie that is coming out is something that would have absolutely been up my alley as a kid. And so being able to put that out in the world and have someone come on your podcast one day and be like, well, this was the thing that was really important to me is a really cool thing to think about. So.
Yeah, I think it's so cool because a lot of the stuff you've done recently is content that is basically geared towards kids and teens. So you're going to have quite a bit of influential moments with people with the media that you're putting out now, which is very cool.
So it's so wild. I'm so grateful.
I'm so proud too.
Hey!
So it's exciting. I love a little fun little look at her go.
I'll take it.
Well, as you said, we're going to talk about what influenced you to get to this point today. So why don't you tell us what show we are talking about today that changed who you are as a person?
We are talking about the Canadian and Australian co-production Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World.
So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is most known for Sherlock Holmes.
Correct.
And now we are talking about something very different that perhaps I personally hadn't heard of before you told me about it.
Fair. Very fair.
Yeah. And I love that you picked something that you were like, it's a Canadian and Australian co-production.
Yes.
Yes. So niche, so fun. The show came out in 1999. For people who have only ever heard of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in respect to his great detective, what would you say The Lost World is about?
So The Lost World is about a group of men. So specifically just the book. So the book came out first, of course. The book is so boring. It is only about the men. And it is the most, I tried to read it after becoming obsessed with this TV show. And I was like, oh, well, all of the interesting characters are the women and they're not in this book at all. Why am I doing this? But yeah, the book is about these, a band of explorers who search for a lost civilization. They essentially hear that there are dinosaurs in the Amazon. And so an explorer, Indiana Jones prototype, 2 scientists and a news reporter go down to the Amazon, and they get lost on a plateau where in the TV show, loads of crazy, mysterious amazing, wonderful things happen. In the book, crazy, mysterious things happen. I can't stress this enough. It's so much more boring than the TV show.
Oh, okay, so it's like a little pre-Jurassic Park, pre-Indiana Jones
Yeah,
adventure style
so
vibe.
it's very like 1920s adventurer style. Like it was written around that time, so like the Adventurers Club-esque aesthetic is very strong in the vibes. And so when the TV show was made, there is those Jurassic Park and Indiana Jones have already been in the zeitgeist, and so it's sort of bookended in a very interesting way where it's like these things, like arguably The Lost World was a creation for, I mean, one of the Jurassic Park films is called The Lost World. Like there is definitely tendrils of this particular book that created these movies that then I'm sure lent itself to the inspiration for the show.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting bookend to have it be essentially like the book was definitely something that could have influenced things that we're super familiar with. And then the TV show almost comes in the sense of people being like, oh, these things are super popular. What IP could we turn into a
Yeah,
TV
exactly.
show? Very funny. I love that it feels like something that we should have heard of. I feel like that's something.
It was around the time where, so I think another Australian show that was happening at the same time is a show called Farscape. It was a little bit after The Lost World, so I think that became a little bit more popular. But yeah, for a time, but also it was between Farscape and Xenon Warrior Princess and Hercules. So a lot of shows that were, because it was just very cheap to shoot in Australia at the time, and so Canada would do these co-productions, and then they would become syndicated, which is how I saw it. So I started watching it in high school, like freshman, sophomore year of high school, before school on TNT. It was always on at like 7 a.m.
Oh, wow. So like when you were getting ready type of situation, like over cereal?
Oh, no, I didn't. I would absolutely not get ready. Like I would get ready beforehand so that I could sit and watch with my entire attention on The Lost World. Like I was already ready for school. I had already gotten everything done. I didn't eat breakfast at the time because I didn't realize it, but I can't have orange juice, and breakfast in Florida is almost always orange juice. It's almost only orange juice. And so every time I would have breakfast, my stomach would hurt, and I'd be like, oh, I think I just don't like breakfast. Spoiler alert, I can't have orange juice, and that's really the problem.
You know what? I am learning so much about the way that your body cannot process things.
Yeah.
Like in general, I've learned that too. I was like, I recently, and I won't, I'm not willing to commit to it, but I struggle with bread.
Sure.
With digesting it.
Sure.
I love bread.
I know that my body is like not as much a fan.
Yeah, like I don't feel good for like 3 days after, but man, nothing can beat the high of while
but
I'm
it's
eating
so
it.
good.
You know what I mean?
It's so it's there and it's important. Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, bread is delicious and important and warm.
Yes.
But you know what? I don't like orange juice, so I feel like you're missing nothing.
No, what I'm missing is mimosas, but what I end up doing with mimosas is just having the champagne. So I have arguably the better part of mimosas.
Live long in champagne, I guess.
That's right. That's right.
I think that's better. I think, you know what? Your juice is not that good. Don't let anybody tell you that it is.
I truly, I'm in the anti-juice train for life, I think. And
I love it.
Yeah.
You know what? In honor of you, I may never drink juice again.
You're welcome. Honestly, this is a gift that I am giving you.
Thank you so much. Well, okay, so you were getting up at a point and getting ready and locking in. Do you remember the first time that you saw it that made you want to be up early enough to actually spend your time watching the show before school?
So it definitely would have been either between 2002 or 2001. And I'm pretty sure I know which episode it was. But you have to understand that TV was like a brand new thing for us. We didn't have a TV until around this time. And so I was like giddy with all of the possibilities that could be on television. And so I wanted to be like all the kids that I'd heard about who like watched MTV before school. Cause I was like, I have been sheltered up till now. I will now be part of the community. And so originally it started with me watching, because also my parents, who were fairly strict, were not paying attention before school because I have 4 younger siblings and they were busy with them. So I got to sort of sneak into mom and dad's bedroom and watch TV while they were busy. They knew what I was doing. It wasn't like I was subtle about it, but
Sure.
I was out of the way and keeping to myself. And so they were like, fine, whatever you want to do, babe. And so I started watching MTV and I quickly discovered how boring it actually was at the time. I was like, why do people care about this? This is dumb.
MTV at that time was just music videos, wasn't
Yeah, it was just music videos. And then like in the afternoons, it would do TRL or whatever. But I was like, after 1 or 2 music videos, I was like, oh, I get it. Like this is fine. This is nothing. I'm gonna look for something else now. And so I would like flip through the channels and things like that. And at first, at 6 a.m., Charmed came on. And I at first was like, oh, this feels like something that I would like. I know that I'm technically not allowed to watch it because it's witches, and that was very not okay in my house. But I was like, I kind of am interested in this. But then The Lost World came on and I was like, what is this? I'm much more interested in this. And so I started to like that became sort of my new ritual in the morning was to watch it at 7.
So was it Charmed was on and then Lost World came on afterwards, like the next hour?
Yeah, Charmed came on at 6. This was the other thing. I was never going to wake up at 6 a.m. Like that was just not, I already woke up at 6 a.m. I wasn't going to wake up earlier to like watch Charmed and then watch Lost World. So it was like, okay, well, no. Yeah, so Charmed came on, then Lost World, and then I think Saved by the Bell. It was something along those lines. It was a very strange sort of
morning lineup.
I don't know who did that programming, but God bless them.
You know what? It sounds like a fever dream, and I'm into that.
Yeah, it was great. It was truly the best way to start your mornings.
So I was curious because when you mentioned Charmed, I almost was about to ask you if that was, I knew you grew up in Florida in like a smaller side of town and in more of a religious area, right? So Charmed was off limits in theory. Like if your parents had seen it, it would have been.
Oh, I knew. Yeah, I knew that was not. So I worked on a show called Supernatural for a number of seasons, and I remember when Supernatural came on, whenever it started airing in 2005. And I saw like 5 minutes of it and I was like, nope, I will not be allowed to watch this. And so it's a very fun sort of full circle effect when I did start writing for the show. But yeah, Charmed was another one where I was like, no, this is, anytime you mention witches, my mom would be like, I think I was talking to somebody earlier. The first time I think I heard about Harry Potter, it was in connection to book burning. Like that was just sort of how, like that was the sort of circles that I was in at that time. So yeah, so I was like, I'm not going to tempt fate by trying to watch this and then never being allowed to watch television ever again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. I can't believe I didn't mention Supernatural in your intro. I was focused on the new stuff. Because we've had 2 people come on the show already that have been like, Supernatural is the thing I have to talk about that changed my life.
Yes.
So it's
love to see it, love to hear it.
Yeah, so you're already on your full circle of influencing people to live their lives. So I do love that. Yeah, I am always curious. I really never think about it because I moved to LA when I was 11.
Right.
But before I lived in LA, I was born in Virginia and then I lived in Florida from like age 5 to 10, so like 5 years, 5.5 years. And it's very similarly in the schooling system, the books were not, the Harry Potter books were banned. That's why I never got into them. They were not like in the library. They weren't allowed. How did you, because it sounds like also this is like around that time your first experience with having TV accessible to you and maybe your first little bit of freedom in like the way tablet kids get their moments these days. Were you starting to like navigate that idea of things being banned and trying to understand why, or did you sort of go along with, I'm not going to, try to find the things that I'm not allowed to access?
I definitely, I knew that I never wanted to adhere to my parents' sort of strict vibes because it was always very much like, you're not allowed to do this. Well, why? Well, because I've never been a huge fan of that. I think that it's very important to test everything and look at everything and say, okay, well, like, why do I care about this? What do I want to do about this? There were definitely certain things that I was like, Charmed was one. I think that's a really good example of like, I know that I won't be allowed to watch this. I don't think that I'm going to press the issue. Whereas I would watch that 70s show late at night when my parents had gone to bed. And that was also a pressing of the issue, but it didn't press in a way that I was like as nervous about. I was sort of testing the waters, figuring out for myself what works, and what worked for me and what felt like the best options at that time, and how to test the waters and test the boundaries without being too much of a rebellious kid, because I was never a rebellious kid. That was just not who I was ever going to be. So
it sounds like maybe like the area you lived in was strict to begin with, but then your parents were a little bit stricter beyond that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There was a level of strictness that even in retrospect, I don't think that I would want to carry on. But yeah, I mean, it was good in that like it did teach me to test everything and make sure that I have reasons for things. And I think that was a valuable lesson.
Yeah. Did you feel like your awareness of it started around the time that you started to maybe have access? Like, it sounds like the TV existing started to give you the access to tell what things you could or couldn't, but did you have the awareness that you were being restricted before that?
I did have the awareness. I had a sort of difficult time leading up to it. So we moved around this time. Part of the reason we got a TV was also because we had just moved to the town that I spent my teenage years. It's a place called Celebration, Florida. It's the town that Disney built. We moved there in 2001. And before that, there had been a bunch of stuff in my family that had been really difficult. I had been dealing with some depression and suicidal ideation, which is very strange for like a youngster to have at the age that it was. We also had gotten a diagnosis for two of my siblings on something, and that had really sort of upended the family in a way that we're still dealing with. And I think because of that, I had always sort of known that there was a heaviness. I'm the oldest, and there is a level that like being the oldest and being the oldest girl, especially in the South, you sort of take on a lot of emotional labor and emotional responsibilities. And so I had always gone to books as an escape. And then whenever television came around, and then I had always read, I had always been given carte blanche on what to read. I read things that I definitely should have not have read at a very young age. And I think because of that, I had always been sort of aware that I was pressing the boundaries and having to make my own decisions. And then, yeah, TV came in and it was just the next phase of that.
Sure. Did you guys move for, like, were your parents working for Disney, or what was the reason to move to Celebration?
My mom has always really loved it. We tried a couple years before to move and it just didn't really work out. And that was a difficult time. And I think it was sort of my dad being like, here, wife, like maybe this will be helpful after all of sort of the stuff that we had gone through. And so nobody worked for Disney until later. My dad, I think at one point he got like a part-time job just because he gets bored very easily. And so he like drove boats for Disney and had a great time.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, there wasn't any sort of like, well, we're working for Disney now, we should go down
And
here.
now we move there.
Yeah, it was purely a fandom decision.
Your mom was just like, I love Disney so much.
Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting. So your mom, was it like the Disney movies, the Disney parks? She was a Disney adult to some degree?
She was absolutely a Disney adult. And still really is, I think. Yeah, I've had a really interesting conversations with people about like fandom as passed down sort of a thing, or like genetic or something like that. My mom was absolutely part of the Beatles craze, like even to the day. Like so talking about the strictness, the rules and things. We weren't really allowed to listen to secular music, but I grew up listening to the Beatles, the Beach Boys, and the Monkees because it was like, yeah, of course we would listen to that. And so, yeah, it's interesting that like my mom had some very strong fandom tendencies that I carry through myself.
Yeah. Did she identify this, or does she now identify them as fandom tendencies, or she's just like, I love this thing?
I don't think that she understands fandom in that way.
Word, yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't think that she. So you and I both understand fandom is like what the culture is and the concept, and part of that definitely came about through the internet age. Like I remember getting my first fanfiction.net account and like learning a lot of things through that. I think, that was such a very pivotal part. And whereas my mom has always struggled with the internet. So I think she was of her particular generation of fandom, but I don't think that they have the same words that like we sort of all created because we were all on the internet at this early phase of like learning about OTPs and learning about ships and learning about all like Angel Fire websites and things like that.
Yeah, so she probably didn't have the language for it, but
No,
obviously participated in it. Yeah.
yeah.
That's I love the idea that it's like genetic, whether that's necessarily like inherited or learned behavior by watching your mom be passionate about it, that you can then apply that behavior to your own things. There's something very lovely about that. Now I'm just
Yeah.
thinking like you'll have your next generation of fandom little
Yeah.
people as well.
That's the goal.
I love it. So when you move to Celebration and then you start, you have your TV, you're in sort of like a transitionary period at that point. Is that when you started to kind of meet kids that were in the MTV generation that you were starting to kind of want to compare to, or was that something you were carrying over?
Yeah, so a large part of I think my relationship, especially to the Lost World, was a sort of like the year before we moved to a new school. I said before, suicidal ideations, partially because of not being able to get along with the kids in my private school and not knowing how to like be and feeling very down on myself. And I don't want to say it's bullied because I don't think it was like bullying as people like there's a different there's a difference in bullying, and I was just very depressed and I didn't understand people. And so I think that I was carrying with me to this new school. I went to a public school for the first time. And the nice thing about a public school was that it was so much bigger that like I didn't have like only 6 people in my class, and if these 6 people didn't like me, I was screwed. It was now like, oh, cool, I have maybe 12 people in this class. I'll have 14 in another class, and they will all be different people. And that was nice. And that was, I wanted to learn and I wanted to like fit in a way that I did not feel like I felt fit in the other school. And so, yeah, it sort of led me to, okay, well, how do I find TV and things to talk to these people about? Because I'm not allowed to read Harry Potter. I'm not allowed to see PG-13 movies. Even if my youth group was going to go see this movie, I was still somehow not allowed to see it. And, all of these different things. I was like trying to find a way to connect when it felt like everything was against me.
Yeah, that small school, small space thing is so real, and I think like you don't realize it until after you're old enough to understand that.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to like fit in to, especially when you're younger, you just think like, oh well, everybody this age is supposed to be friends. And I don't know if that's like a carryover from the years that you have to invite the whole class to the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there is that idea when you're younger that like everyone should like you and you should fit in.
Yeah.
Did you it sounds like you probably didn't, but you had the feeling of I don't fit in, but did you have like the understanding of that's what it was, or did it just kind of became overwhelming?
It just became overwhelming and I just felt wrong. Like I felt like, and I think part of this comes from, the particularly strong religious spaces that I was in at the time, where it was like, if you're doing everything correctly, you will fit in. And I mean, I don't believe that that is theologically accurate, but I think that is the lessons that I was gleaning, is that like, if I do all of the boxes, I will do all of the right things, and that is what I am supposed to do, and then I will fit in and be the right person that I need to be. That is not the case. That's not how anything works, first of all. But second of all, I was just a weird kid. I was a weird kid with big hair that like was loud and had trouble fitting in. And so I felt overwhelmed from not knowing how to be any different than I was. And I thought that, oh, well, it would just be better if I didn't exist.
Yeah, I think especially when you're talking about it at such a young age, I think sometimes we don't realize like how deeply it does affect us at that like and how much kids do feel, because I know you mentioned that it's abnormal for a kid that young to be feeling those ways, but I do think also like sometimes we forget that kids at that age feel things just as
Oh, yeah.
intensely as we do. So
Yeah.
it is one of those things where it's like there's the added pressure that, oh, you're so young, what do you have to be upset about?
Yeah.
But it's like that's
It's
still a feeling.
it's the thing of, oh, you're so young, what do you have to be upset about? And it's but the truth of the matter is, I am so young, I have not experienced anything else but this. This is the
Yeah.
only thing that I've experienced, and it's bad.
Mhm.
Why would I expect anything else to be good? Because I have not
Yeah.
had the experiences that now as an adult I can look back and go, oh, okay, well, that was a very difficult experience, but I have had good experiences since then, and I'm very grateful for it. And my understanding has widened in a way that, like, as a kid, of course it wasn't wide. Of course I didn't know anything else because that I
Right.
didn't have the access to it.
Yeah, it's like it's what if the only like the I think we always think like, oh, here's the worst thing that'll ever happen to you, and it happens at a certain point of your
Yeah.
life, and it's awful if it happens early. If it happens, it changes you. But then it's also, what if the worst thing that's happening is the only thing that's ever
Yeah.
happened? It's just not
Yeah.
there's no way to process that.
There's no, yeah, exactly. Like, it's just bad. It's just fully
Yeah.
bad. And
Yeah.
so and then you have to find a way to keep going, because then everyone is, and I've said this before, I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and I had 2 siblings that required more attention. And so I think that was the other thing that I was looking for when I found The Lost World. Was I was
Mm.
looking for a way to understand myself and someone to help me understand. I was looking for an adult to care about me, really. Like, my parents loved me. I know that they loved me, but they were very busy doing a lot of things and working, like moving to a new place, dealing with 4 other kids who were younger and needed way more work and help, not knowing what to do with me. And so I found my place in The Lost World.
So you watched it, and I kind of love the idea of like it's almost like a refuge in the morning that
Yeah.
everything's happening, you had your kind of hour by yourself.
Yeah.
Was it a character or a moment that you were like, this is the sort of place that I'm feeling, or the world, the escapism? There's so much about the show that I could see being something you would latch onto in that moment.
I love everything about the show. Truly, though, I think my saving grace from the show was Marguerite. Marguerite was, and it's one of the reasons why I started reading the book and I realized Marguerite wasn't in the book. And I was like, then what's the point? Why would I read anything if Marguerite's not here? But she was, I think, so influential in my life. She was such an influential, like, first of all, from the very aesthetic space, she is the only person that I remember seeing in animated movies, old movies. We watched a lot of like 1960s movies, things like that. She was one of the only actresses that I had ever seen with hair like mine, a big curly hair that
Yeah.
always felt unruly, always stood out when I didn't want it to stand out. And she had hair like me. She looked like me. And that was, at a time, especially when you're like at that age, I was trying to be pretty. I was trying to understand my body, and it was changing, and I didn't understand anything about it. And this woman was beautiful, and she looked like me, and she had hair like mine, and I could be pretty too, was hugely impactful. And then from the other side of it, she was strong. She was so strong in a way that, like, I definitely learned some negative lessons that I've had to unlearn in my adulthood, that I very much have been like, oh no, I definitely learned that from Marguerite. I felt very weak. I felt very unable to handle life. And Marguerite was so strong and had people who loved her, but also could take care of herself. And that was really helpful at the time.
Yeah. I love the idea about the curly hair, actually, because I'm curious if you had sort of like the same. This is something that actually is pervasive in media still to this day.
Yeah.
Actually, there's no curly hair. I mean, there's some.
There's
not a lot.
more now. There's definitely
There's
more
more.
now.
Yeah. Were you because I did the same. My hair is down now, but normally, as you know, I have pretty big curly hair as well. And I know for like the years that you're talking about, like sophomore, freshman, like high school, I straightened my hair a
Absolutely
ton.
straightened my
Were
hair.
you the same way? Yeah.
Absolutely straightened my hair. It takes over an hour to straighten my hair. It's still to this day, it takes over an hour. I straightened my hair so much during that time.
Yeah, I was like, it's now I've finally gotten all of the damage out of it.
Yeah.
But
That's a struggle.
yeah. Yeah, I also I did so we were in high school in different times, but I did get those swoopy bangs, which was the worst possible thing you could have done if you have curly hair.
I
because
I think I was lucky because I was right at the tail end of the swoopy bang. And I was lucky in that I had horrible haircuts when I was younger because my mom does not have the same hair that I do. And so I didn't know how to cut my hair, let alone like style it or anything like that. I definitely had bangs as a kid and they were not attractive. They were a bad look.
Just like a straight up like across the forehead fringe.
I
type of
had
thing?
literally everything, every hairstyle that I possibly could have. I looked like a yield sign half of my childhood. Like it was just such an unfortunate look. And part of it was just because so my curly hair comes from my dad's side, and my dad's side even, who like I have maybe one aunt that has hair sort of like mine, but she keeps it short and she keeps it sort of in a bob. No one else, like my mom, my grandmother, none of them knew. Even my mom's or my dad's mom, that's not her hair. She's very thin, like straight hair. And so I had no one who was like, let me teach you how to have your, like, how to cut your hair, how to style it, how to like it. Fun fact, if you ever go to Paris, there's a couple of hair salons that are very specific to curls. I went earlier this year and got my hair cut by like specifically curly hair cutter people, and it was life-changing. It was so exciting.
I love that. Yeah, I got my first dry curl cut a few years ago. That was very exciting to me.
It's such a it truly is such a life-changing thing when you have curly hair and you're like, I've never known how to do this.
Yeah, because most of my haircuts growing up, like I would go to like a salon and they straighten your hair and then cut it.
Yeah.
And so that's fine if you wear your hair straight, but then when you wash it out and you want to wear your hair naturally, your hair's all over the place because
that's not how it's supposed to. Yeah, exactly. That's not how you're supposed to cut it. Yeah.
Absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
And similarly, like for me, like I grew up with just my dad for most of my life, and so like at that point he's taking you where they're supposed to take you to get your haircut.
Right. He doesn't know. Why? Yeah.
He doesn't. He can't. Of course my curly hair comes from him, but obviously he's not wearing it down to
I like my dad. The most my dad had with his curly hair, he had like a white dude afro in high school because it was this like the 70s,
the style,
and but that was the most, and like that was as much of his hair as he had to deal with. And then by the time I came around, he had no hair. So like there was no real way for me to understand how to do any of this. Like to your point, because your dad's what's he gonna do?
Yeah, what's he gonna like? Yeah, it's so interesting to me too that it's like really not depicted on screen very often, and even you hear sort of like different stories of actresses in general with curly hair being like they don't really know how to handle it, so they just straighten it. And it's just interesting because it's one of those things you don't think about as much. We think about like representation when it comes to race or gender or sexuality or those different things that you want to see on screen growing up. But there are so many parts of your appearance, especially as a young girl, that you're like, well, this isn't pretty because you're not thinking about it, but you just don't. And also I think especially in like you mentioned Saved by the Bell and that era of sitcoms, very much those nerdy characters had that big curly hair.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that like we would be remiss if we didn't point out the fact that like largely the reason that curly hair is not on screen is because of racism.
Yes, that would be my issue, but that's definitely the issue I have of not being able to see people who look the same as me. But I do think like, there's differences as well. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Well, and I think that like ultimately that is sort of the like strange byproduct in a way that like I, a white person, am like aware of that lack of representation just in this area because I happen to have hair that like does not like it. I mean, and it's not like incredibly curly. What is it? The 4 on the curl spectrum where it's like really tight curls.
Really tight.
It's maybe more like a 3, but even within that, like it's because I have been aware of that, it's been a thing of like, oh yeah, no, there is just a level of not seeing that representation that like is, I think, opened up my eyes at a younger age than if I had lighter hair or straight hair or anything different than what I have.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're sort of in that space as a white person living in Florida, but your proximity to the idealist idea of ideal image of whiteness, I guess, is the word
Yeah.
I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Makes you more aware of the lack of representation on the other side, where it's like, okay, so I do see like my like you do see yourself represented in that space, but it makes you a little bit more aware that other people
Yeah.
are not represented in a larger way.
100%. Yeah. It was a very, I think one of the first aspects of seeing how important this particular character was to me, that I was like, oh, I would like this for everyone all the time.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing you talked about with her is this idea of strength. And one thing that you touched on that I would love to talk more about is the idea that you had comfort and learned things from it in a good way at the time, but that it also maybe caused some issues that had to be unlearned later on.
Yeah. So I love Marguerite so much. She is like the standard woman of the time, in that she is very like prickly, I would say.
Mm.
She is beautiful and mysterious and has a difficult relationship with the idea of parents. She's looking for her. Basically, she comes to the plateau, with the rest of the party. She funds she funds the party because she's looking for something in particular, and she gives off this view that she's only materialistic. She only cares about money. She only cares about getting jewels and like rebuilding the fortune that she spent on this expedition. But as the show progresses, you realize that like she is lost in her own way and looking for a way to understand herself, essentially, because she was abandoned as a child. She was put up for adoption. She's an orphan, and she wants to know what her parents are, who her parents are. That makes her, abandonment issues create this very strong character who then pushes everyone away. And at the time, I was like, that's great. That's what I want to do. I want to push everyone who ever could care about me as far away as possible, so that I would know who really cared about me. So that like I didn't get hurt. And in that, later in life, I really had to unlearn a lot of those particular traits that like I at the time completely viewed as strength, completely viewed as how I want to move through the world. And then I was like, oh, well, I would like to keep my friends, and I would like to be open and vulnerable. I would like to know how, like, I went to therapy and was realizing that like all of these things that I viewed as great attributes were actually preventing me from having the relationships that I wanted to have.
Yeah. Yeah, so you were sort of like watching someone who had not the same, but a similar sort of traumatic issue with your feeling as though you were being abandoned in the moment.
Yeah.
And then almost mimicking her trauma response as a
Yeah.
coping mechanism,
100%.
and then having to unlearn it. Yeah.
That's exactly what it was. I was like, I will take this trauma response, thank you. This is now my coping mechanism. I think that's great. I see no issues with this.
It's interesting though, because I think that is a pretty common thing to do when you find, like, I know I did similar things with I was just talking to my dad about this actually, where I was obsessed with Tony Stark growing up.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I was obsessed. And there are moments now where I look back and I'm like, I was like the captain of my robotics team. I learned how to program at a really young age.
Amazing.
Like, did all these things, and I look back, and then obviously I took a turn where
Right.
I'm no longer doing those things. And I look back and I'm like, oh, did I ever really like those things? Or did I see someone who had characteristics of myself that I didn't like, but that also had other characteristics that one of the things that you mentioned about this character, Marguerite, is the idea of seeing like a mirrored trauma response, but also seeing an idea that this character was loved and had people who cared for her. And that would be the part that you were lacking at the time.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we see that. So like I saw what I saw in myself in Tony Stark, and then mirrored a lot of his behavior in the fact that he also had people who cared about him. He was also cool. He also had all these cool things. And so it's almost like you mirror the trauma part, hoping that that's the part that gets you to the nice part.
Exactly, because you don't, especially I think at the age that a lot of this stuff happens, you don't understand the point of the storytelling narrative is that these characters are loved despite that aspect about themselves. they have to push through that, or other people, like part of the journey is like unlearning those things.
Mm-hmm.
But when you are in that trauma response, you only really see that, like, these other people who are trying to love. Like, so much of Lost World is essentially found family, which is another trope that, like, has been a huge part, a thing that I love, and you can be seen in most of the things that I work on. And it is very much that, where I was like, the Roxton is a character from the book, and is one of the characters that, like, I absolutely adore, and absolutely loves Marguerite,
Mm-hmm.
despite everything Marguerite does to try and push him away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's also interesting about that, though, is I do see a lot of myself in Roxton as well. I see a lot of my earnestness, my willingness to help people, and wanting to, like, protect people at all costs. So it feels like there's two sides to this particular ship. And I think that that's true for a lot of ships, to be honest, is that we come into a ship and we're like, I feel more like this is the sad part of me, is this character. And this other character represents the pieces of me that is trying to love the sad parts of me. And ultimately, when the ship is realized, is when and I think that's why we get so frustrated when those ships aren't realized, is because we so desperately want those two pieces of ourselves to find each other.
Yeah. I've never heard anyone think about it that way, but I actually really love the idea that it's almost, I think a lot of people, when you think about fandom that don't understand fandom, look at it and they say, like, I don't understand why you care so much about these two characters kissing on screen. And it's like, well, you don't get that it's actually the only thing keeping me alive.
I think you understand right now that, like, if I don't have this, I have nothing. There is nothing else going on.
We are at the end, and this is my last straw I have. But I think there's something really interesting in what you're talking about, which is the idea that it's not about, I think a lot of people talk about shipping and think about it as, like, I see myself as this character and I'm looking for this other person who fills two halves of a whole. And I think that becomes very prevalent with, like, people who see themselves in those stronger traumatized characters that are looking for
the Dean Winchesters, if you will, because I feel like that is.
I wasn't gonna say it, but I
but listen, we're both thinking of it, and if it's just like, look, I think we both have imprinted slightly on Dean Winchester, so I get that.
Me, Megan. You want to talk about someone with abandonment issues? Couldn't be me.
You want to talk about someone who's the oldest child who has to take care of the youngest children no matter what? Yeah, no, couldn't be me.
I don't know what you're talking about. Me personally, I just like the ones I relate most to the characters who have no trauma whatsoever and deal with their issues very healthily. That's really me as a person.
Yeah, that's really all storytelling, isn't it? That's what makes good storytelling.
But you're right. It's like the idea. I love that idea of, like, it actually being more about a self-acceptance to some degree. And, like, if you can see, not just can Dean find love or be loved, but can the parts of yourself that you see in Dean and the parts of yourself that you see perhaps in an angelic figure. And
arguably an angelic creature who is slightly on the spectrum, maybe, or feels a little out of sorts or out of odds. You know what I mean? Like those pieces within that particular character.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, especially with that particular ship, I can say it, right? It doesn't. The show's over.
It's fine.
Yeah, I was like, it doesn't. I try to balance.
Also,
it when it's
like, what are you talking about? I've never heard of this before. I can't stress this enough. I've been on the internet. I'm aware.
So, like, I think what you're talking about in that character that I or that idea of shipping with those two characters in particular that makes sense to me.
Destiel. We're talking about Destiel.
We're talking about Dean Winchester and Castiel the Angel. Played by the actors Jensen Ackles and Misha Collins. We're on the same page.
Are we all there? We're all there. We're all.
I'll let for everyone get to flip to the correct page. Okay. But with those two characters, one of the things about Dean that sometimes I could see that there are those pieces where you would fill yourself into cast more is, like, Dean is cool. Dean is really cool despite, like, everything else about him. And I don't know how cool people who relate to Dean Winchester feel most often
Right.
in life. And
Right.
there's some
Yes.
yeah. And also I think you have those two characters are one is trying to move towards grace and the other is falling, and they're sort of meeting each other in the middle.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really nice about viewing that as actually two halves of yourself.
Yeah.
And can you accept both parts? And can you accept the idea, because I think the other part with those types of characters is like Dean has to accept love, which
Yeah.
people who relate to Dean perhaps are not the best at doing.
And I think that is whereas the other character is like about unconditional love, right?
Yes.
Like that is essentially what an angel is sort of coming from, is a space of unconditional love. And so I think, I mean, except angels are dicks, but beyond that, but I think that that's one of the reasons why I've never fully gotten into a ship war for anything. Like me personally have never been super hardcore on any side of a ship war, despite being very into iCarly at a very particular time. And it's because I think I've always looked at ships as being two sides of a whole. So like either you want Sam and Freddie or you want Carly and Freddie. It doesn't matter because you see yourself as one or the other, and you are both sides of that whole. And people would like it would be really boring if everybody were the same ship. That's
that's true.
Ridiculous.
And that's ironically, like iCarly is such a good example of what you're talking about, because everybody kind of sees themselves at that, or in that kind of, if you're in that ship war, so to speak, you're seeing yourself as like, okay, I want to accept love from this Freddie character. And there's that like innocence and warmth. And then are you a Sam Puckett? Are you mean? Are you like that? Or are you a Carly? Are you funny? Are you kind of bubbly? And I think there's something very wholesome of looking at it that way, as opposed to looking at it as like people really do get into the trenches over
absolutely.
it.
And like when you look at it from a space of like, this is about who you are as a person, I totally understand ship wars, because someone is coming up and saying like what you want and what you want to believe you deserve doesn't matter. And it should actually be this thing. And so ultimately what that is secretly saying, and I don't know whether, like, maybe you are aware of this, I certainly wasn't aware of this, what someone is coming in and saying is that, like, you are not deserving of the love that you want. Someone else is deserving of the love that you want.
Yeah.
And that fucking sucks. That feels real bad.
Yeah, I think that's like, certainly wasn't like able to put words to it as a child, right? Or as a teenager. But when you look at it now and that is why you were so upset, because someone's coming in and saying that. And especially when you're talking about characters that like the ship war is such an opposite. Like I'm thinking of like Teen Wolf, where you have like Derek Hale and Stiles Slinsky, or Stiles Slinsky and Lydia Martin, and it's they're such opposing characters. So you're like you're saying, like you're like imprinting on one type of character, and then someone's telling you, you know, the other person deserves it.
Right. Well, and also you're imprinting on one type of character that is expressing a trauma response that you relate to. Yeah. And so that trauma response is then being put under fire, when in reality you are traumatized. Like you are dealing with something and should not be under attack for that. And it's true, especially I think Teen Wolf is such a good example, because like Lydia is her own level, like dealing with her own level of trauma, and so is Derek. And so like they're both valid traumas that I think different people relate to in different ways.
Yeah. As you can tell, Megan and I may have let this conversation get a little bit away from us, so this is going to be the first part of a 2-part episode. The second episode will be out next Wednesday, but if you are dying for more content right now and you enjoyed a little bit of our conversation about Supernatural, I would remind you that the very first episode of this podcast centered on the relationship that Lauren Grace Thompson has with the show. You can dive back on that one by scrolling all the way back to the beginning of the feed and listening to that episode. And there's also an additional episode with Supernatural fan and TikTok influencer Berkeley Novak Stoles. If you scroll back to either of those episodes, I think you'll really enjoy seeing what happens when someone who creates content affects another person. We'll be back next week with the rest of this episode. Between now and next Wednesday, if you want to keep in touch, you can follow me on social media at Marissa Kamari, anywhere you get your social media fix. You can also sign up for my newsletter by going to our website, tandonproductions.com, clicking on You Are What You Love, and signing up there. I send out an issue with every episode of this podcast. And we just started a Discord server, so if you want to connect with me, with other listeners, and talk about the types of things that we are talking about on this show, you can join that by clicking on the link in the episode description. Until next Wednesday, I hope you are enjoying what you love.